The wind howled across the empty street of Hollow Creek, a small frontier town buried in winter's grip. Snow came down sideways, thick and fast, stinging the skin like shards of glass. A single wagon rattled down the muddy road, pulled by a tired chestnut horse. At the reins sat Marcus Webb, the town's blacksmith, a tall man with a face carved by years of heat, smoke, and loss. His coat was worn, his gloves patched, and his breath fogged the frozen air. He'd been out delivering horseshoes to a nearby ranch, but as the snow thickened, he steered home, hoping to beat the storm before nightfall. Passing the old stone bridge outside town, Marcus noticed something strange. A flicker of movement, just a shadow at first. He slowed the horse, squinting through the blur of snow. There under the bridge, two figures huddled together. For a second, he thought it might be drifters or beggars. But when lightning flashed, he saw their clothes. Fine, once expensive, now torn and soaked with mud. One was a boy, maybe 10 years old, shielding a frail old woman wrapped in a ripped shawl. She held a small leather satchel tight against her chest, her white hair whipping in the wind. Marcus jumped down, boots sinking into the slush. "Hey there," he called out over the storm. The boy turned sharply, eyes wide, face dirty but proud. "We don't need help," he shouted, his voice trembling more from cold than courage. Marcus stepped closer, careful not to startle them. "Son, you'll freeze to death out here," he said. The old woman lifted her head, trying to speak, but only managing a cough that shook her thin body. Even in that moment, Marcus noticed something about her, the grace in how she held herself, the dignity that survived under all that dirt. "Ma'am," he said softly, "you need shelter." She tried to stand, but nearly fell. The boy grabbed her arm, glaring at Marcus. "We're fine," he said again, but his lips were blue. "Boy," Marcus said, steady and calm, "I got a warm forge and food. You don't have to trust me, but trust the fire. It'll keep her alive." The woman, her eyes cloudy with fever, finally whispered, "Leo, child manners." Her voice, though weak, carried the tone of someone raised on proper speech and old-world courtesy. She looked at Marcus. We have no choice." Marcus nodded. "Then come on." He lifted her gently. She felt as light as a child, bones beneath thin skin, and carried her to his wagon. The boy, Leo, climbed up beside her, never taking his eyes off Marcus. The wagon creaked back toward town, wheels sinking in the slush. Marcus flicked the reins, the horse snorting as wind whipped around them. The woman murmured things under her breath, words that didn't make sense. "They can't find the papers," she mumbled. "Vincent will kill us." Leo leaned in quickly, covering her mouth with his small hand. "Grandmother," he whispered, panic flashing in his eyes. Marcus said nothing. He kept his face neutral, though inside his mind raced. Papers? Vincent? Who were these people? The forge's glow appeared ahead, the one steady light in the dark storm. The smell of iron and coal greeted them as Marcus pulled the wagon to a stop. He helped Leo carry his grandmother inside, up the narrow stairs that led to his living quarters above the smithy. He laid her down on his bed, covering her with thick wool blankets. Her breathing was shallow, her skin clammy and pale. Marcus went back downstairs, stirred the fire, and warmed water for tea and soup. When he returned, Leo sat by the bedside, spoon-feeding his grandmother carefully, one trembling hand holding the bowl. Marcus set down the tray and said quietly, "You can rest now, boy. She's safe here." Leo didn't look up. "I'll rest when she's safe for real." Marcus studied the boy. His words were too formal for his age, his hands too soft for someone who'd known hardship long. And that satchel the woman clutched even in sleep. It looked heavy, old, and important. Hours passed. The forge below hissed and glowed. The storm outside raged on, but inside, the air was warm, filled with the soft crackle of fire and the quiet sound of a boy watching over his grandmother. Marcus stayed awake by the hearth, sharpening tools just to stay alert. He couldn't shake the questions circling his mind. Who were they? What kind of family fled into the night, dressed in silks and fine shoes? Why were they hiding under a bridge with a satchel worth more than his whole smithy? At dawn, the storm eased. Snow still blanketed the streets, but the sky had softened to pale gray. Marcus climbed the stairs again, balancing a tray with porridge and toast. The room smelled faintly of lavender, the old woman's shawl perhaps. She was awake this time, sitting up weakly, eyes clearer than before. "Good morning," Marcus said gently. She blinked at him, trying to gather her thoughts. "Sir, we've imposed terribly on you." "You've imposed nothing," Marcus said. "You needed help." He set the tray on the small table beside the bed. "Eat something. You need your strength." Leo helped her sit up, tucking the blanket tighter. She tried to lift the spoon herself, but her hand shook too much. Leo took over again, steady and patient. Marcus watched them, the love there was plain. After a while, he asked quietly, "Do you have family I can contact? Someone I can send a telegram to?" The woman's expression hardened, as if he'd touched a bruise. "Our family," she said slowly, "is who we're hiding from." Marcus blinked. "Hiding from your own kin?" She nodded once. "Call me Margaret," she said. "The boy is Leo. That's all you need know." Marcus studied her face. Beneath the wrinkles and exhaustion, he saw traces of what she once was: proud, sharp, and perhaps very wealthy. The kind of woman who'd never spoken to a blacksmith before, much less slept under his roof. He didn't press further. "All right, Margaret," he said. "You rest. I'll be downstairs if you need anything." She managed a small, tired smile. "You're a good man, Mr. Webb." "Marcus Webb." "Thank you, Mr. Webb," she said softly. Truly, days passed in a fragile rhythm. Margaret's fever faded, though her strength returned slowly. She insisted on helping, mending Marcus's torn shirts with stitching so fine it looked machine-made. Leo studied beside her, reciting bits of Latin and history from memory. Marcus found himself listening from below, surprised at how educated the boy was. Sometimes Leo came to the forge, curious about the tools and the horses. He had a natural calmness with the animals, gentle but sure-handed. Marcus noticed that. "You've got a good touch," he said one afternoon. Leo shrugged. "My great-grandfather bred horses before everything changed." "What changed?" Marcus asked. Leo glanced toward the stairs, then at his grandmother sewing near the window. She gave a small shake of her head. Leo fell silent. The quiet stretched, filled only by the crackle of fire and the ring of hammer on metal. And then, one cold morning, the peace shattered. 5 riders came into town, their fine coats shining under pale sunlight, revolvers at their hips. Their leader had a scar down his cheek and eyes like polished steel. They stopped in front of the smithy, boots crunching on frozen dirt. Marcus stepped outside, wiping soot from his hands. The scarred man spoke first. "We're looking for a woman named Margaret Sterling and her grandson. You seen him?" The name hit Marcus like a bell. He kept his face still. "Sterling? Can't say I have." The man pulled a photograph from his coat, an old daguerreotype. It showed a younger Margaret, proud and elegant, standing beside a boy in formal clothes. "We're paid by her family," the man said. "They just want her home safe. $5,000 in gold for anyone who helps." Marcus forced a neutral smile. "Haven't seen anyone like that. You might check the hotel." The man studied him a long moment before sliding the photo back. "We'll be watching," he said, tossing a card into the snow. As they rode off toward the saloon, Marcus's pulse hammered in his chest. He looked up toward the window above, saw the curtain twitch. Leo's small face peeking out, fear written all over it. Inside, Margaret's satchel lay hidden under the bed. And Marcus knew, with cold certainty, that whatever they were running from had just found them. The next morning, pale winter light slipped through the small window above Marcus's bed, turning the room a soft gray. Margaret lay propped up on pillows, her hair loose around her face, her skin still thin and delicate, but no longer shining with fever. Her eyes fluttered open and she blinked slowly, trying to remember where she was. The last thing she recalled clearly was snow, cold that cut to the bone, and a stranger's strong arms lifting her. Now she saw a rough wooden ceiling, a small dresser, and a chair where Leo sat, chin on his chest, asleep with his hands still wrapped around hers. Marcus pushed the door open quietly with his shoulder, carrying a tray with porridge, toast, and a pot of weak tea. The floorboard creaked, and Leo jerked awake, eyes darting first to his grandmother, then to Marcus. Margaret tried to sit up straighter, old habits pushing through exhaustion. "Sir, we've imposed terribly on you," she whispered, trying to sound proper even as her voice trembled. Marcus shook his head and set the tray down on the small table. "You've imposed nothing, ma'am. You are freezing to death under a bridge. Eat something, and then we can argue about manners." There was a gentle warmth in his tone that made the corners of Margaret's mouth lift just a little. Leo helped her sit up, placing the pillow behind her shoulders. Her hands shook when she reached for the spoon, so he took over, feeding her one small bite at a time. Marcus watched them, arms crossed loosely, leaning against the doorframe. After a moment, he spoke in a careful, even voice. "Do you have family I can send word to? Someone I could telegraph?" They might be worried. The air in the room changed. Margaret's eyes hardened, the softness gone. "Our family," she said slowly, "is who we're hiding from." Marcus frowned. "Hiding from your own kin?" She looked down at her hands, thin fingers twisted together. "Call me Margaret," she said. "The boy is Leo. That is all you need to know for now." Marcus held her gaze for a long second, weighing her words, seeing the fear and stubborn pride behind them. He could have pushed, demanded answers, but something in her tired face stopped him. He only nodded. "All right, Margaret. You rest. I'll be downstairs if you need anything." Over the next 3 days, a fragile rhythm settled into the small space above the smithy. Margaret's fever stayed away, but she remained weak. She moved slowly, each step an effort, but her mind was sharp. She refused to lie in bed all day like an invalid. As soon as she could sit up without swaying, she asked Marcus for mending. He brought her a pile of his torn shirts, socks with holes, and a coat that had lost its buttons long ago. Margaret threaded a needle with steady care, and when she began to stitch, Marcus saw immediately that she had the kind of skill few women in this town had. Her stitches were tiny and even, almost like they'd been done by a machine. "My mother insisted on proper needlework," she said once, without looking up. "Said a lady's hands should never be idle." Leo spent most of the days close to her, but he didn't simply sit and worry. Margaret turned the small room into a school. She had no books, but she had a memory like steel. She made Leo recite Latin phrases, do sums in his head, and name dates from history. Again, she would say calmly whenever he stumbled. Marcus, passing by the open door, would pause, listening. He heard names of Roman generals, English kings, laws and battles, and strange Latin words that meant nothing to him. The boy might look like a half-frozen stray right now, but he was clearly no street orphan. His speech was too careful. His mind was too trained. In the evenings, Leo came down to the forge. At first he only watched, standing a safe distance from the sparks. The heavy sound of hammer against anvil, the orange glow of hot iron, the snorting of horses in the side stall, it all drew him in like a magnet. Marcus showed him how to calm a nervous mare, how to let the horse smell his hand first, how to move slowly and speak low. Leo seemed to understand without needing much explanation. "My great-grandfather bred horses," he said one afternoon, running a hand down a gelding's neck. Before everything changed, Marcus paused, turning the iron in the fire. "What changed?" he asked. Leo's jaw tightened. He glanced up toward the ceiling, where Margaret sat mending by the window. She looked down at him, and with the smallest shake of her head, warned him to stay silent. Leo swallowed his words, eyes dropping back to the horse. "Nothing," he said. "It doesn't matter." Marcus noted the way they spoke without words, the looks and tiny motions that passed between them like secret signals. This was a family on high alert, not just poor travelers down on their luck. Still, there was warmth growing between them all. The sound of a woman sewing, of a boy reciting lessons, of shared meals around a small table. These sounds filled the spaces that had been empty since Marcus's wife died 2 years ago. He'd lived in quiet for so long that he hadn't realized how lonely the silence had become until it started to lift. But the world outside wasn't quiet. On the fourth morning, as Marcus shoveled ashes from the forge and prepared to shoe a ranch horse, the sound of hard hooves echoed down the frozen street. He looked up to see 5 riders coming in from the East Road. Their coats were thick and expensive, dusted with frost. Each man carried a revolver at his hip. These weren't simple cowhands. They dismounted in front of the smithy, boots crunching on icy ground, eyes scanning the street like they owned it. The leader had a thin, hard face and a scar along his left cheek, pale against his skin. Marcus stepped out into the cold, wiping his hands on a rag. "Morning," he said, voice neutral. The leader didn't return the greeting. "You Marcus Webb?" he asked. Marcus nodded slowly. "That's right." The man looked him over, then said, "We're looking for an elderly woman and a boy. Her name is Margaret Sterling. The boy is her grandson." The name hit Marcus like a spark to dry tinder. Sterling. He kept his expression carefully blank. "Sterling," he repeated. "Can't say I know anyone by that name." The man reached into his coat and pulled out a small daguerreotype in a worn leather case. He flipped it open and held it up. Marcus's heart gave a hard, painful thump. The picture showed a younger Margaret, her hair darker, her face smoother, but clearly the same woman upstairs. She stood in front of Grand House, wearing fine clothes. Next to her was a boy in a neatly pressed suit, younger than Leo was now, but with the same sharp eyes. The background was all polished stone and tall windows, the kind of wealth Marcus had only ever seen on paper money and railroad posters. "Elderly woman, white hair about 75, the scar man said. "Boy about 10, dark hair. They're missing. Family's worried." His mouth twisted as if the word worried tasted sour. "There's a $5,000 reward for information that brings them home safe." $5,000. It was more money than Marcus would see in 10 lifetimes at the forge. Enough to buy a ranch, a new life, maybe a whole new town. He felt the weight of the number sit on his chest, but behind it came the memory of Margaret's words. "Our family is who we're hiding from." He cleared his throat and shrugged. "Haven't seen anyone like that," he said. "You might try the hotel or the livery." The leader studied his face, eyes sharp and cold. Marcus held the stare, his own gaze steady as an anvil. After a long moment, the man snapped the case shut. "We'll be in town a while," he said. "If you see them, you let us know." He pulled a card from his pocket and flicked it toward Marcus, who caught it without looking down. The riders mounted up and moved their horses toward the saloon across the street, tying them to the rail. They went inside, but Marcus could feel their attention still on him, like a hand pressing between his shoulder blades. Slowly, he turned and glanced up at the window above the smithy. The curtain there had shifted. For just a second, he saw Leo's face, pale and frightened, watching the men below. The curtain dropped back into place. Marcus slipped the card into his pocket without reading it and went back inside, his mind already racing. Now he knew their last name. Now he knew others were hunting them. And now he had to decide what kind of man he really was. Marcus waited until the riders across the street settled into the saloon and the noise of their boots and voices faded behind swinging doors. Then he went upstairs with a heaviness in his chest that had nothing to do with the climb. Margaret sat in the chair by the small window, shawl wrapped tight around her thin shoulders, the leather satchel at her feet. Leo stood beside her, jaw clenched, watching the street like a guard on duty. They both turned when Marcus entered, and he didn't bother with pleasantries this time. He shut the door, slid the simple wooden bolt into place, and leaned his back against it. "All right," he said, his voice low but firm. "Enough shadows. Those men downstairs are hunting an elderly woman and a boy named Leo. They showed me your picture and offered $5,000 to turn you in. I'm sheltering you in my home, and they're watching this place. If I'm going to keep you here, I need the truth. All of it." The words hung in the air. Margaret's eyes closed for a moment, as if the weight of them pressed down on her bones. Then she opened them again and looked at Leo. He didn't say anything, but his hand tightened on the back of her chair. "Should I tell him, grandmother?" he asked, his voice small but steady. Margaret shook her head gently. "No, child. I will." She took a slow breath, the kind a person takes before stepping into cold water. "My full name is Margaret Sterling," she said. "My late husband was Maxwell Sterling." Marcus blinked. He knew the name, though he never expected to hear it inside his simple room. "Sterling, as in the railroad people?" he asked. Margaret gave a sad, tired smile. "Perhaps not to a good man like you. It means little. But to the world, yes. My husband built the Sterling Railroad and Mining Company from nothing." Leo straightened, almost like reciting a fact from one of his lessons. "Grandfather owned rail lines from here to the coast," he said quietly. "Mines in 3 territories. He was worth over $30 million when he died." Marcus sat down hard on the edge of the bed, the number crashing over him like a wave. 30 million. It was a world beyond anything he'd ever known. And yet here that world was, sitting in his patched-up shirts and warm blankets. "You're those Sterlings?" he asked. Margaret nodded. "We are what's left of them," she said. Her hands rested gently on the leather satchel at her feet, fingers tracing the worn edges like she was touching something holy. "Maxwell died 8 months ago," she began, speaking slowly, as if turning over each memory with care. "Natural causes. He was 82. We were married 55 years. He was not perfect, but he was a good man who never forgot the years when he was poor. When he made his will, he left controlling shares of the company to me and to Leo, his only grandson." She paused, her eyes distant. "He skipped his eldest son, Vincent, entirely." Marcus frowned. "Vincent," he repeated, remembering the name Margaret had whispered in her fever. "The same Vincent you're afraid of?" "Yes," Margaret said softly. "Vincent is Maxwell's son from his first marriage, and my stepson. Maxwell loved him, but over the years he saw what the boy truly was. Hard, cruel, hungry for power. Near the end, Maxwell told me he could no longer trust Vincent with the company or its people. He said, 'If Vincent controls what I built, he will bleed it dry and leave nothing for the workers who gave me everything.' So he wrote a will that gave Vincent nothing but a modest allowance. The rest he left in my hands and in Leo's future." Her voice trembled slightly on Leo's name, but she kept going. "Vincent was furious when he learned of it," she continued. "He contested the will in court, of course. Hired the best lawyers money could buy. He lost. Maxwell's will was ironclad, and the judge upheld it. But losing in court did not cool his anger." She tapped the satchel with one thin hand. "You asked what we're hiding, Mr. Webb. This is it. After Maxwell's death, I began to look more closely at the company books. There were accounts that did not make sense. Money gone where no money should have gone. I started to ask questions. Quietly, one bookkeeper, an honest man, came to me late at night, shaking with fear. He showed me copies of ledgers, bank records, letters. Vincent had been embezzling from the company for years, stealing from the worker pension funds, from the charity accounts, from the very people Maxwell had promised to protect. Millions of dollars. Her fingers tightened on the satchel. "Those records are in here. Every false account, every forged signature, every transfer Vincent made into his own pockets. Proof enough to send him to prison for the rest of his life." Marcus swallowed. The picture was becoming clear now, ugly and sharp. "And when he realized you had the proof," he said slowly, "he came after you." Margaret nodded, her eyes suddenly wet. Leo stepped closer, his hand resting on her shoulder. "When Vincent learned she'd found the evidence," Leo said, his voice shaking with anger he was too young to carry. He tried to kill us. First, the carriage wheel came loose on a mountain road. Our driver died when the carriage rolled. We survived. Then there was the fire at the house. At night, we barely made it out. Grandmother knew it wasn't chance. I knew Vincent's hand when I saw it, Margaret said bitterly. I took Leo, and we fled through the servants' entrance with nothing but the clothes on our backs and this satchel. We've been on the run for 5 weeks. Every time we tried to reach the law, we found Vincent's shadow already there. He has judges in his pocket, sheriffs who owe him favors, politicians who enjoy his gifts. We went to the local authorities in one town, and they turned us away before they even read my letters. One man told me quietly that if we stayed, he could not guarantee our safety. Marcus felt anger rise inside him, slow and hot. He'd seen corruption before, but never like this, stretched across railroads and mines and whole towns. "So, where were you going?" he asked. "You must have had some plan other than hiding under bridges in snowstorms." Margaret nodded. "We are trying to reach the territorial capital," she said. The governor, James Harrison, was Maxwell's oldest friend. He is an honest man, one of the few Vincent cannot buy. If we can reach him and place these documents in his hands, he has the power to act. He can order an investigation, bring in federal marshals, strip Vincent of control, and bring charges that no friendly judge can dodge. With what we have in this satchel, Vincent would not just lose the company. He would hang. The word hung in the small room like cold iron. Marcus thought of the riders at the saloon, of the scarred man's careful lie about a worried family and a reward for bringing them home safe. And in the meantime, Marcus said slowly, "Vincent's men are combing the territory for you, offering $5,000 to anyone willing to sell you out." He let that number hang there for a moment, watching Margaret's face. "You should have told me who you were from the start." Margaret looked away, shame and stubbornness warring behind her eyes. "Would you have believed an old woman in filthy clothes claiming to own railroads?" she asked quietly. "Or would you have thought I was mad? Or worse, turned us in for that reward?" Leo stepped forward quickly. "We couldn't risk it," he said. "Vincent told everyone we'd run off with family money, that we were sick, that grandmother's mind was failing. He said anyone who helped us would be charged with aiding thieves and lunatics. We didn't know who to trust." Marcus sighed and rubbed a hand over his face. He thought of his empty house before they arrived, of the quiet and the pain that lived there since his wife Sarah and their baby died. He thought of Leo spooning soup into his grandmother's mouth with shaking hands. He thought of the way Margaret had mended his shirts without being asked, the way she called him Mr. Webb, with a respect he rarely got from rich men. "Well," he said at last, "you trusted me anyway by staying, and I've already lied for you once." Leo straightened. "We'll leave," he blurted. "Tonight. We put you in enough danger. We can find another road, another town." He broke off when Margaret tried to stand and nearly fell. Marcus lunged forward and caught her, feeling how little she weighed, how her ribs pressed against his arm like sticks under cloth. "You're in no shape to travel," he said firmly, easing her back into the chair. "You can barely walk across this room. You die on the trail before you got halfway to the capital." Leo's eyes shone with helpless frustration. "Then what are we supposed to do?" he whispered. "If we stay, they might find us. If we run, she might die." Marcus stood there, looking from the boy to the old woman to the satchel at her feet. He saw not just trouble, but something else, a chance to do more than shoe horses and outlive his grief. His thoughts flicked back to his own childhood, to the grandmother who'd taken him in when his parents died in a winter fever. She'd had nothing but a small cabin and a strong back, but she'd shared both without question. "My grandmother took me in when I had no one," he said quietly. "She was old and poor, but she gave me everything she could. I owe her more than I can ever repay." He took a deep breath and straightened up, decision settling into his bones like a brand. "You need to get to Governor Harrison," he said. "You can't do it alone, so I'm going to take you." Leo stared at him, stunned. "Why?" he asked. We're nothing to you. Just strangers who walked into your life and brought trouble with us." Marcus shook his head. "Your boy protecting his grandmother," he said, "and a grandmother trying to protect her husband's legacy and a lot of people who've never met her. That's enough. Sometimes strangers are the only ones who do the right thing." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Webb," she whispered, her voice rough with emotion, "you don't know what you're promising. This will be dangerous. Vincent will not stop. He will send more men, worse men. You could be killed." Marcus met her gaze without flinching. "I've already buried a wife and child," he said softly. "I know what it is to lose everything. I won't stand by and watch a grandmother and a boy be hunted down if I can help it. We leave at dawn. I've got a sturdy wagon, 2 good horses, and I know the back roads through the mountains. If anyone can get you to that governor, I can." Leo stepped closer, his small hand gripping Marcus's sleeve, as if testing whether this man was real. "You'd really do that for us?" he asked. "For nothing." Marcus gave a faint smile. "Not for nothing," he said. "For my grandmother. For your grandfather. For a lot of workers who don't even know their pensions are being stolen. And maybe," he added, glancing at Margaret, "for the chance to see a man like Vincent's sterling answer for what he's done." Margaret bowed her head, overcome, then looked up at him again with a strength that hadn't been there before. "Then God help us all," she said, "because it seems we're going to war." Marcus did not sleep much that night. After telling Margaret and Leo they would leave at dawn, he went down to the forge and began to prepare the way a man prepares for a storm he knows is coming straight at him. He checked his wagon from wheel to spoke, tightening bolts, adding an extra strip of iron to the weakest rim. He harnessed his 2 draft horses, Bruno, a big Combay, and Daisy, a smaller but strong gray mare, giving them extra feed and brushing them down until their coats shone in the lamplight. Inside the small living quarters, he made up a bed in the back of the wagon. Old quilts, spare pillows, folded blankets stacked to soften the bunks. Margaret was too frail to ride a saddle mile after mile, and he knew each jolt could hurt her. On the table, he laid out what they would take: a rifle, his old pistol, a hunting knife, a coil of rope, a small tin of bullets, bags of dried beans and salt pork, a loaf of bread, a little coffee, 2 water jugs, and a battered medical kit left over from his wife's last illness. Margaret sat in the chair by the hearth, watching him with that quiet, measuring gaze of hers. "We'll take the back roads through the foothills," Marcus said, more to himself than to her. "Avoid the main trail. They'll be watching the easy way." Margaret nodded. "Vincent always expects people to choose comfort," she murmured. "He never imagines someone will pick the hard road unless they are desperate." She took a piece of paper and, with a shaking hand, began to write a letter. "This is to Governor Harrison," she explained, "in case we are delayed. I will send a telegraph in the morning with a message only he and I will understand, and ask a trusted operator to forward it. If we do not arrive in 5 days, he'll know something has gone wrong." Marcus knew the telegraph operator in town, an older man named Hale, whose wife had once been turned away from Sterling Hospital because she could not pay. Hale still carried that bitterness like a stone in his pocket. If anyone would risk helping Margaret, it was him. Before dawn, with the sky just turning from black to deep blue, Marcus hitched the horses to the wagon. The streets of Hollow Creek were silent, the saloon dark, but he could feel eyes on him anyway. The car the scarred man had given him still rested in his pocket like a curse. He chose to ignore it. He helped Margaret down the stairs, her weight barely there on his arm, and settled her onto the padded bed in the wagon. Leo climbed in beside her, tucking the blankets around her shoulders and placing the leather satchel within easy reach of her hand. "You all right, grandmother?" he whispered. "I have been worse," she replied with a faint smile. "And I have seen worse men than Vincent fall. We just have to reach Harrison." Marcus drove them out the back way, not past the saloon, but through the narrow alley behind the livery, where the ground turned quickly from packed dirt to rough track. His rifle lay across his lap, hidden by his coat. The air was sharp and cold, each breath cutting his lungs, but the sky was clear and the rising sun painted the snow on the hills with a soft gold. The first day passed in slow, careful travel. They wound through pine forests where the trees stood tall and close, their branches heavy with snow. The wagon bounced and groaned over frozen ruts, and Marcus did his best to steer around the worst of them. But still Margaret winced sometimes when a jolt caught her by surprise. She drank water when Leo held the cup to her lips, ate small bites of bread and beans, and told the boy stories to keep his mind off the fear. She spoke of Maxwell building his first stretch of track with his own hands, of workers singing in the evenings, of towns springing up like wildflowers along the rails. Marcus rode with one ear listening, learning more about the man whose name he'd seen on train schedules all his life. At one point, Margaret asked about Marcus's own past, and he told her in simple words about Sarah, his wife, her laughter, her death in childbirth 2 years ago, and the baby who didn't live long enough to be named. Margaret's eyes softened with a grief that understood his. "You carry her dead with you, Mr. Webb," she said gently. "So do I. Perhaps that is why we recognize each other." That night, they camped in a small clearing sheltered on 3 sides by rock and trees. Marcus built a small fire, careful to shield the light from open view. They ate quietly, the crackle of wood and the distant call of an owl the only sounds. Margaret looked weaker as the hours passed, her face pale, her breath shallow. But when Marcus tried to urge her to rest, she gripped his hand with surprising force. "If something happens to me," she whispered, glancing at Leo, who slept with his head on her arm, "promise me you'll get him to safety. Promise you won't let Vincent twist him the way he twisted others." Marcus swallowed hard. "Nothing's going to happen," he said, but she only stared at him until he added, "I promise. I'll get him to the governor, no matter what." Early on the second day, they entered a narrow canyon, the walls rising steep and close on both sides. Marcus did not like it. The path was tight, the wagon wheels skidding near edges where the ground fell away. The air felt too still, too quiet. He flicked a look up at the ridge lines and saw what he'd feared, shapes moving against the sky. "Hold on," he snapped, and then they were there, 8 riders appearing on the ledges and at the mouth of the canyon, rifles and pistols already drawn. Bruno and Daisy shied, hoofs scraping on stone. The same scarred man from Hollow Creek rode forward, grinning without humor. "Into the trail, Mrs. Sterling," he called. "You gave us more trouble than expected." Guns pointed down at them from every angle. Marcus felt his muscles tense, his mind racing for any opening. "Let the woman and boy go," he shouted back. "This is between you and me now." The scarred man laughed. "Noble, but Mr. Vincent wants them alive. You? He doesn't care if we bring you in breathing." He lifted his pistol and aimed at Marcus's chest. The world shrank for a heartbeat to that small black circle. Marcus dropped from the wagon seat in one fast move, rolling behind the wagon wheel as the shot rang out and splintered wood where his head had been. In the same motion, he grabbed his rifle from the floorboard, cocked it, and fired at the closest horseman. The man pitched sideways out of the saddle, his gun spinning from his hand. Chaos exploded in the tight space. Leo yanked Margaret down onto the wagon bed, covering her with his own small body as bullets tore into the sides. Horses screamed, hooves slipping on rock. Marcus fired again and again, taking cover behind the wagon, forcing the riders on the ground to duck. One man charged the wagon, reaching for the leather satchel with a snarl. Margaret, eyes blazing with a strength that defied her years, drove a long steel hat pin from her hair into the back of his hand. He howled and fell away, blood on the snow. "Leo!" Marcus shouted. "The reins!" The boy scrambled up just enough to grab them, his hands shaking but determined. He slapped them hard against the horses' backs. Bruno and Daisy lurched forward, dragging the wagon into a wild, jerking run. Marcus sprinted alongside, grabbing the side rail and hauling himself up even as more shots cracked behind them. Loose stones clattered, The wagon bounced so hard it felt like it might break apart, but somehow they burst out of the canyon's far end, leaving behind 3 dead men and a trail of churned snow. They did not stop for a long time. Only when the horses began to stumble from exhaustion did Marcus pull them off the road and into the shelter of an old half-collapsed miner's shack tucked into the trees. There he saw the damage fully. One horse was limping badly from a bullet graze. One wagon was cracked almost through, Margaret bleeding from a cut at her hairline and holding her side with every breath. She tried to wave away his concern, whispering, "I'm fine. Keep going," but when she tried to sit up, pain twisted her face. Leo knelt beside her, eyes wide with fear. Marcus bound her wound and wrapped her ribs as best he could, his hands gentle for such a big man. Then he went to the wagon and stared at the broken wheel, the injured horse, the deep tracks already filling with fresh snow. "We can't keep going like this," he said, more to himself than to them. "The wagon won't last another mile, and that horse won't either. Vincent's men will be tracking us. We have to move faster and leave less trail." The answer was clear and brutal. They would have to abandon the wagon, the only soft bed Margaret had, and travel on horseback. He chose the 2 sound horses, loaded their saddlebags with the barest essentials, and helped Margaret into the saddle in front of him, her body resting against his chest, her breath warm but shallow. Leo mounted the other horse, the satchel strapped tight to his side. Before they left, Marcus set the broken wagon on fire, watching it burn until smoke curled up through the trees. "If they find it, they won't find you," he told Margaret. Then he turned the horses toward the river he knew ran through those hills. If they could ride through it long enough, the water would hide their tracks. It was a hard plan, and it might kill them as surely as any bullet, but it was the only chance they had. By the 3rd morning, the mountains felt like they were closing in on them. The cold had crept deeper into Margaret's bones, and even with Marcus holding her steady in the saddle, she swayed more than she sat. When they spotted the old stone trading post tucked beside a bend in the road, a squat, weathered building with a half-broken sign and a dry-looking well, Marcus knew they had no choice. "We stop here," he said, guiding the horses toward it. Leo looked over, panic already on his face. "But they're behind us," he protested. "If we stop, they'll catch up." Marcus shook his head. "If we don't stop, she'll die in the saddle." Inside, the place was empty but solid, thick walls, one sturdy door, and narrow windows that could be used like shooting slits. Marcus carried Margaret inside and laid her on a makeshift bed made from sacks and old blankets. Her skin was hot, her breath fast and shallow, the earlier head wound now angry and red around the edges. She drifted in and out of sense, sometimes whispering Maxwell's name, sometimes reaching for Leo and calling him my brave boy, sometimes speaking of trains and tracks that only existed in her memory. Leo sat beside her, holding her hand, jaw clenched as if force alone could hold her here. Marcus hauled crates against the door, checked his rifle and pistol, and counted his bullets twice. "We make our stand here," he said. "If they come, this place will be easier to defend than open ground." As he worked, the sound of hoofbeats broke the silence. A single rider approached, middle-aged woman in a worn coat, hat pulled low, cheeks pink from the cold. "Hello, the house," she called from outside. Marcus moved to the narrow window and peered out, gun in hand. She raised her empty hands. "I don't want trouble, just looking for a place to water my horse. On my way to the capital." The word capital sent a jolt through him. He hesitated, then opened the door just wide enough to talk. She glanced past him and saw Leo and Margaret. "They don't look good," she said quietly. "There's a doctor in the capital. I could carry a message for you, if you need help." Margaret, half awake, heard her and forced herself to speak. "The governor, Harrison, old friend," she murmured. "I can write him." With shaking hands, she scratched a short letter, naming Vincent's crimes and asking for protection and law. The woman tucked it into her coat. I'll ride straight through, she promised. Governor will have it tomorrow. Marcus studied her face, wanted to trust her because he had to, because at this point, one more chance was all they had. He finally nodded. All right, go. She rode off as the sun slid lower, her horse's tail disappearing around the bend. What none of them knew was that she had already sold her loyalty long ago. Vincent had men on every road, and she was one of them. As night fell, Margaret's condition worsened. Her fever climbed high, sweat soaking the blankets, even in the cold air. She gasped for breath, her chest rattling with each inhale. Leo leaned over her, tears he wouldn't let fall brimming in his eyes. Don't leave me, grandmother, he begged. Please, don't you dare leave me. Margaret lifted a trembling hand and touched his cheek. Leo, she whispered, her voice barely there. You are strong, like your grandfather. Stronger than you know. The documents, get them to the governor. Promise me. I promise, he choked out. I promise, grandmother. She slipped back into unconsciousness, caught between this world and the next. Marcus knelt beside her, feeling how hot her skin was. She needs a doctor now, he said. Leo shook his head. There's no time. They're coming. I can't leave her. Marcus grabbed the boy's shoulders, forcing him to meet his eyes. You are her only chance, he said. The town is 2 hours' ride if you push the horse. You find a doctor and bring him back. I'll hold them off as long as I can. Leo's face twisted with fear. What if they come while I'm gone? Then they'll meet me first. Marcus replied calmly. Go, Leo. You gave your word. Those words hit like a hammer. Leo looked at his grandmother one more time, bent to kiss her forehead, then ran for the door. Moments later, Marcus heard the thunder of hooves as the boy rode off into the night. The trading post was quiet again, except for the crackle of the small fire and Margaret's harsh breathing. About an hour later, the ground began to tremble. This time it wasn't one horse, it was many. Marcus moved to the window and saw the glow of torches bobbing in the darkness, a ring of riders surrounding the stone building. 20 men, maybe more. A voice rose from outside, smooth and cold. Marcus Webb, send out my mother, and we might let you live. Marcus's jaw tightened. So this was Vincent Sterling. She's dying, Marcus shouted back. She needs a doctor, not a rope. There was a pause, then a mocking tone. Then send her out, and we'll be sure she gets proper care. Marcus almost laughed at the lie. I don't believe you, he said. Not for a second. The answer came in the form of a crash as a makeshift battering ram slammed into the door. The wood shuddered, then gave way on the second hit. Men poured in, guns drawn. Marcus fired from behind a crate, dropping one, then another. The room exploded in smoke and noise, bullets chewing up wood and stone. He fought like a man with nothing left to lose, swinging the rifle when it emptied, using his fists and his knife when they closed in. He dropped 3 more, but 10 men beat him down finally, blows raining on his ribs, his head driving him to the floor. They wrenched his arms behind his back and pressed a boot into his neck. Through the blur, he saw polished boots step into view. Vincent Sterling stood over him, tall, well-dressed in a long coat too fine for the wilderness, his hair neat, his eyes as cold as the iron rails he owned. He glanced at Marcus like he was a stray dog, then moved to Margaret's side. She lay still, pale and limp, the satchel clutched weakly against her. Vincent pressed 2 fingers to her neck. Still alive, he said flatly. Pity. Marcus spat blood. She's your mother, you bastard, he rasped. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Vincent looked at him with faint amusement. She's a problem, he said. Problems get solved. He motioned to his men to search the room, the saddlebags, every corner. The documents are here somewhere. Find them. They tore through everything, but the satchel with the most important papers had already gone with Leo. Vincent's mouth thinned. He walked back to Marcus and crouched down so their faces were level. Where are the documents? He asked softly. Marcus stared back and said nothing. The first punch rocked his jaw. Kicks landed in his side, his back, his stomach, until the world narrowed to bursts of white pain. Still he did not speak. Finally, Vincent stood, breathing a little harder. He drew his pistol and walked back to the bed where Margaret lay. He pointed the gun at her temple. "Last chance," he said calmly. "Where are the documents? Or she dies right now." Marcus struggled against the hands holding him down. "You'd shoot your own mother?" he gasped. Vincent's face did not change. "I'd shoot anyone who stands in my way." He cocked the hammer. Marcus's resolve cracked. "Wait," he shouted. Vincent paused, head tilting. "Yes, the boy has them." Marcus panted. "Leo." He rode to town with the papers. "To get a doctor." "Which town?" Vincent demanded. Before Marcus could force out an answer, another gunshot split the air, louder from outside. One of Vincent's men at the door jerked and fell, blood blossoming on his chest. Another shot, another man dropped. "Federal Marshal," a rough voice yelled. "Lay down your weapons." Deputies poured through the broken doorway, badges catching the firelight. In the confusion, Vincent spun, firing back, using the bed as half cover. Bullets tore through the room. Men shouted. Some surrendered, some fell. A tall man with a star on his vest leveled a rifle. "Vincent Sterling, you're under arrest for conspiracy, embezzlement, and attempted murder," he shouted. Vincent grabbed Margaret by the arm, dragging her upright as a shield. "She's my mother," he shouted back. "You shoot, you kill her." At that moment, a new voice cut through the chaos. High, young, and furious. "Liar!" Leo burst in from the doorway, face streaked with cold and sweat, a doctor and more deputies at his back. He ignored the guns, running straight to the bed as the marshal and his men closed in with careful aim. The doctor hurried to Margaret's side, checking her pulse, barking orders to clear space. "She'll live if we move fast," he muttered. Leo turned on Vincent, eyes blazing. "You're not trying to protect us," he shouted. "You killed grandfather. I saw you." The room went very still. The marshal's gaze sharpened. "Is that true, boy?" he asked. Leo swallowed, but his voice stayed clear. "I was there the night grandfather died," he said. "I was supposed to be asleep, but I heard them arguing. Vincent and grandfather." I hid behind the curtain. Vincent said, "You've lived too long, old man. Time to go." Then he put white powder in grandfather's medicine. Grandfather drank it and started gasping. He couldn't breathe. Vincent just watched. He never called for help. When grandfather fell, Vincent checked his pulse and he smiled. Leo's voice broke on that last word. Vincent's mask slipped for a heartbeat, rage flashing through. "You little rat," he snarled. "You should have stayed hidden." The marshal's voice was like iron. "That's a confession, Vincent. We have the boy's testimony, and we have the telegraph and the letter your spy delivered to us instead of you." At Leo's signal, one of the deputies brought in the leather satchel. Papers spilled across the table. Ledgers, letters, bank slips. The marshal flipped through them, his eyes growing darker. "This is enough to hang a dozen men," he said. Vincent made one last desperate break for the doorway, but 3 deputies tackled him before he made it 2 steps. Iron cuffs snapped shut around his wrists. As they dragged him to his feet, he finally looked afraid. Leo stayed at his grandmother's side while the doctor worked, Marcus lying bruised and bleeding on the floor, but still conscious enough to hear the marshal say, "It's over, Mrs. Sterling. We've got him. You brought us the truth." And for the first time since Marcus had found them under that bridge, the danger that had been closing in on them all began, slowly, to crack. The days that followed felt like waking up from a long, bad dream. Margaret Sterling was moved to the capital city, to a quiet private hospital wing that Governor Harrison insisted on paying for himself. The building was grand from the outside, but inside her room was simple and calm. A clean white bed, lace curtains at the windows, and a small wooden chair that Leo claimed as his own. He rarely left her side, sleeping in that chair with his head resting on the mattress. One hand always near hers, as if he feared she might slip away if he let go. Marcus visited every day once the doctor cleared him to stand more than 10 minutes at a time. The beating he'd taken at the trading post left his ribs bruised, his face mottled with purple and yellow, and one arm strapped tight for a cracked bone, but he still moved with stubborn strength. The first time Margaret woke fully and saw him there, standing by her bed with his hat in his hand, she began to cry, soft, shaking tears that seemed to come from a place deeper than pain. "You saved us," she whispered, her voice rasping but clear. "Both of you did." Marcus shook his head. "You're the one who kept going when any other person your age would have stayed home by the fire," he said. "All I did was lend a wagon and a gun." "You did more than that," she said, reaching out a weak hand to squeeze his fingers. "You gave us a chance. Maxwell used to say that's all anyone really needs." The doctor, a brisk but kind man with silver at his temples, told them Margaret would need months to fully recover. The fever had taken its toll, and the journey had pushed her heart and lungs close to their limits. But she was strong inside, stubborn in a way he said he only saw in people who had lived through real hardship. During those weeks, Governor Harrison came often, a tall, stooped man in his 80s with sharp eyes and a steady voice. He sat by Margaret's bed and listened to her story, to Leo's added details, and to Marcus's plain, factual account of what he had seen and done. When Marcus tried to downplay his role, the governor cut him off gently. "Mr. Webb, if more men in this territory had your kind of courage, we need a lot fewer laws," he said. "You'll find I am not stingy with thanks when it's earned." Outside the hospital, the world moved fast. Vincent Sterling was charged not only with embezzlement and attempted murder, but also with the slow, cold poisoning of his own father. The newspapers loved the story. A rich heir caught stealing from workers and killing for power, a grandmother and grandson fleeing across the frontier, a blacksmith risking his life to save them. Marcus's name appeared in print more times in a month than it had in his entire life before. He hated the attention, but he bore it because it meant Vincent's crimes were being dragged into the light. The trial date was set, and while lawyers argued and judges prepared, life quietly reshaped itself around Margaret's small hospital room. When she was strong enough, she moved from the hospital to the governor's guest house, a gracious old building with wide porches, a garden, and a view of the distant hills. Marcus was given a room over the stables, close to the small forge the governor's staff used for horseshoes and repairs. Leo spent his mornings with tutors the governor arranged, catching up on the lessons he'd missed while running for his life, and his afternoons in the stable, where Marcus taught him how to work the bellows, how to swing a hammer without breaking his wrist, and how to read the heat of the metal by its color. The boy took to the work with the same quiet intensity he'd once poured into Latin and history, and soon his hands began to change, small calluses forming, fingers a little rougher, grip a little stronger. Margaret watched all of this with a kind of peaceful satisfaction. Many evenings, she and Marcus sat together in the garden, wrapped in shawls against the chill, watching Leo chase the governor's dogs or practice with a small hammer on scrap metal. "You're good with him," she said one night, her voice soft over the rustle of leaves. "You talk to him like he's a person, not just a child." Marcus chuckled. "He's earned that much," he replied. "Boys see more in a few months than most men see in a lifetime." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "He needs a father, you know." Vincent was never one. Maxwell did the best he could, but he was old and busy. And I was so busy trying to hold everything together, I forgot sometimes to let Leo just be a boy. She turned to look at Marcus. "You don't push him, but you don't baby him either. That's rare." Marcus shifted in his chair, uneasy with praise. "He has you," he said. "You're his anchor." Margaret smiled sadly. "I'm 77, Marcus. I won't be his anchor for long. That's just truth." She let that sit between them, then added, "I've been thinking of the future, of what Maxwell wanted, of what I want, now that I've seen what kind of man you are." In the weeks that followed, she shared her idea, restructuring the Sterling Railroad and Mining Company to honor Maxwell's old promise. better pay, fair pensions, real safety rules, and a new project at the heart of it all. A trades academy for boys and girls who'd been given nothing but hunger and hard roads. Maxwell started with his hands and a shovel, she told Marcus. We forgot that somewhere along the way. I want to remember it. I want to build a place where children with nothing can learn a skill that no one can take from them. And I want you to run it. He was stunned. Me? I'm just a blacksmith, he said. She shook her head. You're a man who knows what it is to lose and keep going. You're a man who took in strangers when turning them in could have made you rich. Those are the only qualifications that matter. Leo, overhearing part of that conversation, burst in with wide eyes. We could help kids like the ones we saw on the road, he said. The ones with no boots. The boys sleeping in alleys behind the stations. We could teach them what you taught me. That night, Marcus walked the streets of the capital alone, thinking of his quiet smithy back in Hollow Creek, of Sarah's laugh echoing in the memory of those walls, of his grandmother's rough hands setting bread in front of him when he'd had nothing. He ended up in an empty church, sitting in a back pew, talking under his breath to a woman who'd been gone 2 years. By dawn, he had his answer. He returned to the guest house and told Margaret and Leo, simply, I'll do it. I'll run your academy. I'll help raise this boy right. But I keep my smithy back home, and any profit I earn goes to a fund for the kids, not my pocket. Margaret's eyes filled with tears as she reached for his hand. Agreed, she said. Leo grinned, so wide it seemed his face might split. Then we're really a team, he said. Marcus looked at them both, an old woman who had crossed hell to do the right thing, and a boy who had seen his own father's evil and chosen truth anyway, and felt something inside him settle. Not just a team, he replied, a family, if you'll have me. And in that quiet room, with no judge or lawyer present, a new future took shape. Not written on paper or stamped with seals, but marked in the only way that mattered. In choices made, promises spoken, and hands clasped across the long, rough distance between strangers. 6 months later, the sound of hammers echoed through the wide brick halls of the newly opened Sterling Trades Academy. The building had once been a warehouse near the edge of the capital, but now it pulsed with life. Rows of forges glowing red, sawdust thick in the carpentry room, and the hum of young voices echoing from every corridor. Marcus stood at the front of a class of apprentices, sleeves rolled up, demonstrating how to shape hot metal without losing its temper. Beside him worked Leo, taller now, hair longer, eyes brighter. He moved with confidence, explaining each step as the younger boys and girls watched. At the far end of the hall, Governor Harrison stood with his cane, smiling quietly as Margaret Sterling, frail but determined in her wheelchair, watched her grandson and the man who had saved them. Reporters milled about, snapping photographs, scribbling notes. One asked Margaret what had inspired the academy. She smiled faintly. My husband believed true wealth comes from work well done, she said. A good man reminded me of that when I had nearly forgotten. Marcus looked up just in time to see her eyes glisten in the forge light. After the ceremony, he stepped outside for a breath of cool air. Near the gate stood a ragged boy, maybe 15, watching the students through the fence with a guarded expression. Marcus walked over. You thinking about joining us? He asked. The boy scowled. What's the catch? Folks don't give things for free. Marcus shook his head. No catch. Just hard work and an honest trade. The boy hesitated, then nodded slowly. All right, he said. Marcus clapped him on the shoulder and led him inside. Leo saw them and grinned. We got another one, he shouted, and Margaret laughed softly, her eyes filling with tears of pride. A week later, she insisted on visiting Marcus's old smithy in Hollow Creek. The train ride was slow, but she loved every minute, gazing out at the mountains she'd once crossed in fear. When they reached town, Marcus helped her down and guided her into the forge that had started all. It looked just as it had before. Simple, sturdy, and full of the familiar scent of iron and ash. It's humble, Marcus said, a little self-conscious. Margaret smiled. It's honest, she said. She wandered the small space slowly, leaning on her cane, touching the workbench, the tools, the old anvil scarred by years of use. On the desk in the corner stood a framed daguerreotype. Margaret picked it up and froze. The picture showed a younger Marcus, smiling shyly beside a woman with kind eyes and soft features. "Your wife," she said. Marcus nodded, his expression gentle. "Sarah. She died in childbirth 2 years ago." Margaret's hand trembled as she studied the woman's face. There was something familiar in her eyes, in the curve of her smile. "What was her full name?" she asked. "Sarah Sterling Webb," Marcus said. "She kept her family name, even after they disowned her." The color drained from Margaret's face. "Sterling?" she whispered. Marcus blinked, confused. Her father was some wealthy man back east. "Maxwell Sterling. Surely that's not." He stopped when he saw Margaret's expression. She lowered herself into the nearest chair, clutching the photo. "Dear God," she breathed. "Sarah was my granddaughter." Marcus's heart stuttered. "Your granddaughter?" "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "My son Thomas's child. He died when she was 15. We took her in, Maxwell and I. She was bright, stubborn, full of laughter. But when she fell in love with a blacksmith, Maxwell forbade it, said she was throwing her life away. She refused to give him up. We disowned her." Her eyes filled with tears. "We never saw her again." Marcus sat beside her, stunned. "She always said her grandparents turned their backs on her," he murmured. "She died thinking you'd rejected her forever." Margaret wept openly now, the sound raw and small. "We tried to find her later, but pride got in the way. Maxwell died, wanted to make it right." Marcus put a steady hand on her shoulder. "She forgave you," he said quietly. Margaret looked up, eyes red. "She what?" "The night she died," Marcus said, voice trembling. "She made me promise. Tell my grandparents I forgive them," she said. "I never understood who she meant until now." Margaret covered her mouth, sobbing harder. "My sweet girl," she whispered. "She sent you to me. That's the only way this makes sense." Marcus shook his head slowly, overwhelmed, but some part of him believed it too. "Maybe she did," he said softly. When they returned to the academy, Leo could tell something had changed between them. They told him everything that evening. The truth about Sarah, about how she and Leo were cousins, about how all their lives had crossed long before they knew it. "So you're really family," Leo said, looking from Margaret to Marcus. "In every way that counts," Marcus replied, pulling him into a hug. Margaret smiled through tears. "That's all that matters." Months passed, and the academy grew. 60 students became 100, carpenters and smiths, machinists and painters. Vincent Sterling was tried, found guilty, and finally hanged for murder and fraud. The newspapers called it the fall of the Sterling Empire, but Margaret called it something else, the restoration of its soul. She named Marcus and Leo as her heirs, ensuring the company and academy would live on under their care. 1 year after the opening, Margaret's health began to fail again. She spent her last spring in the academy garden, surrounded by blooming roses and the sound of hammers from the workshop. One evening, as the sun dipped low, she called Marcus and Leo to her side. "Promise me," she said weakly, "when I'm gone, tell the students about all of this, about the mistakes, the love, the forgiveness. Don't let them forget that family isn't about blood. It's about who stands beside you when the world falls apart." Marcus nodded, voice thick. "I promise." Leo wiped his eyes. "I won't forget, grandmother. Ever." She smiled faintly. "I know you won't, my dear boy." Her gaze drifted toward the sunset. "Maxwell will be proud of you both," she whispered. "And of Sarah. She's here too, you know. In every spark, every forged flame." That night, she passed quietly, her hand resting in theirs. At her funeral, workers, apprentices, and dignitaries stood side by side as the bell rang over the academy yard. Marcus took over as director, Leo at his side. Years later, when students asked about the photograph on Marcus's desk, A young woman surrounded by pictures of Margaret, Leo, and the academy. He always gave the same answer. "That's Sarah," he'd say with a small smile. "The one who taught me that love and forgiveness are the only things worth building." And as the light from the forge glowed behind him, it was clear that what began as a story of escape and survival had become something greater. A story of family, redemption, and the kind of legacy no money could buy.